Welcome to episode 4 of the Men We Are podcast. And in the last episode, I left you with a question that doesn't have an easy answer. If we let ourselves feel grief, what do we do with it instead of letting it harden into bitterness? Because, that sadness on its own, it's not the real danger. And if you think I'm talking rubbish, it's the same as a gun sitting on a table, in that if it's left alone and we do nothing with it, it is just a lump of metal. But the danger with sadness is when it's allowed to move and it takes a chance to stick its heels in. So the easiest route for that sadness taking root is when it's not acknowledged or spoken about, or I suppose not witnessed. And by witnessed, I also mean witnessed by other people, but yourself included in that. So when that sadness changes shape and it goes into that dangerous territory of morphing into resentment, we really have a problem. So I've sat with this and I've tried to tie it down properly, but I just find that resentment, if it does make an appearance, it doesn't tend to arrive loudly. So you don't even see it creep up on you. It just kind of quietly settles in, and you don't even realize it's sitting in the back of your mind, and it's kind of, it's got a viewpoint on everything you're doing. So I've made an attempt to timeline it myself, because obviously if I'm talking about it, I'm experiencing it. And I feel like that the sadness leading to resentment, it's always coming out of disappointment of something. So in my case, I think it was disappointment how things turned out. But for you, it might be something more with the man you are now, who you became. So the absolute farce, instead of me feeling it, because I wouldn't call myself a control freak, but I do like to keep control of things. I try to manage away that disappointment. And that does make me feel pretty stupid. I have to be honest. And if stupidity is the negative emotion, then it's just feeding that disappointment and the resentment. Because an awesome saying that I love every time I hear it, I don't love it for the words, but it makes so much sense, is that misery loves company. When someone's down, they can very quickly bring everyone else down. But when someone's pepped up, when someone's really enthusiastic and happy, they can have that effect on other people. So, to get around that disappointment, to avoid the resentment or attempt to avoid it, I try to stay busy, I stay productive, I fill out the day, and it gets to the point where I feel fine. And, I'm making speech marks in the air by saying fine. And it's almost like guilt. The disappointment and resentment feel like I wasted an opportunity, so I'm guilty. And that word fine, I think it's got to be one of the worst words we as men use. And I wish people, and I do suppose I'm calling women out for this, I wish they would just clock the fact that the word fine is not a positive answer to a question when we're asked how we're feeling. I mean, it should be, if I say to someone, I'm fine, it should be a red flag. I mean, it should be a red flag covered in petrol on fire, because it's not a good word. It's a sign that there is something wrong, but we just don't want to offload it onto someone else. So that feeling fine hardens you up a bit, and it feeds the resentment, which I suppose, because it hardens you up, it can maybe be mistaken for anger directed at other people, or just anger towards other people. And I'm not saying it's always directed towards other people. And this goes back to our makeup of being men. For many men, that anger is actually, it isn't aimed outward at first, or at least for me, it's aimed inward. We get angry at ourselves. And I don't mean we're getting angry at ourselves now, but maybe we're getting angry at the younger version of ourselves who didn't even know better. They didn't know better. It's like we have the hump with our younger selves because they picked the path based on limited information, and we're angry at them for that. So it obviously makes us sad, or maybe a better word is frustrated. So slowly that self-directed frustration, it starts to leak, with a resultant impact on our relationships, our general tone, our demeanor, just the way we look at the world and also the way we're seen by the world. So most resentment, it begins as brief. It begins it begins as brief encounters with grief, and it doesn't have to be dramatic like a massive life event. And like by life event, I don't mean like a car crash. It could be like a relationship ending or losing a job. It doesn't have to be a massive event like that, which makes us sad, which makes us grieve. It could just be, just this quiet realization that some of the doors that were open when we were younger to opportunities that are available to our younger selves, those doors have closed and those opportunities are gone and the doors don't reopen. So it means versions of ourselves, those younger versions of ourselves, didn't survive the life we chose. And I think that fact to me is important because no one actually taught us how to mourn that exact situation. So men are rarely taught how to grieve anything that isn't visible. So, like if someone dies, that's, we can show emotion for that. But what's going on in our heads, it remains a mystery to the universe and everyone in it. So we definitely don't get any guidance, any other perspective. So one of those like invisible things, those things that like, the things that we're not taught how to grieve because they're not visible, I think things like dreams and aspirations would come under that. And there's no ritual for for dreams that you lost and you want to grieve. And as we said earlier, there's no public acknowledgement for grieving the man you thought you'd be by now. It's a concept that we don't get out. You can't put out into the world, I wish I was someone different, or I'm very sorry about that. It doesn't really work, or at least in our head it doesn't work. So instead of grieving, we reinterpret it and tell ourselves stories that feel stronger than sadness, so that we're not facing a situation where we feel weakness. So if we think about sadness, we're thinking in terms of like, this hurts. But resentment says, this is unfair. So sadness itself, it's asking for support. This hurts, I need support. But resentment, by saying this is unfair, you're asking it to be justified, because justification feels safer than vulnerability. And as men, we hate making ourselves vulnerable, because again, we feel like that's a sign of weakness. So this is where the resentment becomes really dangerous, because resentment doesn't protect you from pain at all. All it does is reshape the way you look at the world. So it makes you suspicious of joy. So when things are going well, you still think, oh, this is going to come to an end. And it turns you into, it turns something like hope into something that is naive, or it's an embarrassing idea. Like you're being silly for being hopeful. And it also then makes other people's freedom feel like an accusation that, like you don't share what they have. And that resentment slowly convinces you that the future's already decided and that's your lot, and just you have to accept it. But if you can, and this is like an exercise like yourself, think about where your life is, and are you experiencing any resentment? And if you are, how does it make you feel? Like deep down, how does it actually make you feel emotionally? Because resentful men often don't look angry. Certainly for me, when I'm resentful, it's just like, if I could put that into words, it's like I'm tired and I feel quite cynical. I'm quite dismissive of possibilities when I'm resentful about something. And it's like word to the wise, you younger men need to be more realistic. And I definitely don't, and I'm sure the same as a lot of people, definitely don't say I'm grieving. I'm sad about something and I'm grieving the thing. But instead they say, that's just how life is, you know. And I include myself in that. It's like walking around with a t-shirt with the you know, the well-known bumper sticker mantra, shit happens, and believing it, you know, like just buying into that. But the truth is, resentment isn't wisdom. It's just grief that never felt like safe enough to surface. So that sadness that led to the grief and the resentment, it goes underground, and if it's underground, it can't heal, and all it does is ferment. It just festers. It just gets worse. So how do we let grief move without letting it, you know, burn everything around us? Like, we really have to think hard of how do we allow the sadness to surface without turning it into blame or bitterness or self-contempt. And I don't think the answer is in explosion or, you know, having a meltdown to vent it and like just, yeah, I'm going to go and smash up some breeze blocks. Like, I think we just have to be a bit more precise. And the way we're precise is, the first step for me is acknowledgement, real acknowledgement. You have to accept there is something there. And that means you can't minimize it. You can't compare your pain to someone else's. And you have to get to the point where you realize you're not shaming yourself for feeling the way you are. So just right now, just think of something you genuinely miss and would like to allow yourself to grieve, so that you can free yourself from it. If you can find something like that, if you can get it in the front of your head now, just think about it. And just say to yourself over and over, yes, that thing mattered to me, and losing it hurts. Because what that does, that sentence alone weakens resentment's grip. Because resentment feeds on denial. But if you acknowledge it and you say, no, yeah, this mattered and losing it hurts. Yes, this mattered and losing it hurts. You're accepting of the fact that, you know, like, you are human. So the second step is learning to separate loss from injustice. Like, not every painful outcome means something was stolen from you. And as we said previously on a previous episode, reframing your thoughts so you think you didn't lose something is a better way of reframing things. You didn't lose something, you gave it away. You consciously made that choice. That way you can accept that loss is simply the cost of choosing one life over another. And you become happier with that price that you had to pay because you made the choice. And when we frame it that way, we're starting in the right direction. Because if we frame every loss as a betrayal, again, resentment grows. And if we can frame loss as consequence, that grief is better able to breathe. You know, it can escape a bit. So the third step, kind of last one that I'd say, is allow witnesses. And I know this is tough for guys, and some of you are trapped here at the moment. But there are others of you that are listening to this that have realized the importance of having witnesses. And you're further in the process, further than I am even. Like, grief that never gets spoken about, it becomes identity, and people just think you're an angry dick. But grief that's witnessed becomes experience, and it's our experience that shape our personality, which goes some way to explain the way we are to other people. So if others know what you're grieving, they can understand it and sympathize. And they're actually more inclined to reach out and help. And you'd be amazed when you start telling people you have something you're upset about, something you're grieving, the amount of help you'll be offered. And men, we don't need fixing. Like, you're not a car with a crap alternator. Like, you need a safe space where sadness isn't treated as a weakness or failure. A great place to start, if you're willing, obviously, like, you can go and talk to your friends, tell them you've got real problems, but sometimes that's embarrassing for a lot of us. So a better way is if you can just take yourself out of the box and start with some therapy. You can do it online, you can do it through Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever. And you're getting things off your chest, you're releasing them, you're letting the universe have them. And you're doing it with someone that you don't actually know, which means you're not concerned about, interacting with them going ahead in your day-to-day life. Even better than that, if you can, and you have them available to you, would be to go to something like a men's group, where if you're comfortable, you can tell your story. But if you're not comfortable at first, you hear the stories of others, and it will prove to you you're not alone. And gently over time, hopefully, you should be able to release some of your story too. And if you watch any film, you'll see that grief, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of the character's life in the film, and it always exists within the story. Like these superhero narratives where something happened to them, they became very angry, it changed their persona, and it's part of their story. So the way we interpret our sadness determines whether it softens us or hardens us, and stories definitely steer that. I'm not a particularly religious man, but I do acknowledge that most religions tell stories, like parables, to help people understand better the lessons. What I'm really a big fan of is analogies, for the exact reason, because it makes sense. It gives context rather than just an idea, a concept. If it can be put into context, we're better able to understand it. So I firmly believe that every man carries a private narrative about his life, a story that explains why things turned out the way they did and why he is just the way he is. And that story matters, because grief plus a compassionate story will lead to healing, but grief plus a harsh story just leads to resentment. And we've already established resentment is not what we want in our lives. So you have to really work hard to figure out, how can you make the story a compassionate one, so you can go through that healing process. And if your story says, I failed, or I wasted my chance, or this isn't the life I was supposed to have, that's a fairly negative way of looking at it, and sadness becomes the verdict. But if you can figure out how to say and believe, that's the thing. You're not just saying this, you have to buy into it and believe it. If you can say, this was hard, or this cost me something, or I made the best choices I could at the time, sadness is no longer a verdict. Sadness stays human. It's part of what makes you human, and that's the most important thing. So this is where resentment often reveals itself. It's not as an emotion, but as an interpretation. And it goes back to finding a way to reframe that story and to tell it from a more positive stance, just that you didn't fuck up. That's the important thing here. So remember that if grief and resentment have gone underground, we're not trying to suppress them now. We need to excavate them. And that is going to take some effort, to dig them out, to get them, because they've taken hold. So I want to leave you with a question, and we'll get into it in the next episode. If resentment is grief that did go underground, how do we let it surface without blowing up our lives? And I believe the answer begins with the stories we tell ourselves, about our choices, our losses, and that's where we're going to go next. So, have a think about that. Obviously, in the next episode, we'll get into it. But if any of this is hitting, obviously, I'd encourage you to stay along for the journey. And really, if you think it's helping you, I'm obviously going to encourage you to subscribe to the show, download the episodes so you can listen to them again. They're only short, but hopefully we're getting through the stuff in a pretty consolidated and concise fashion, that it's just the key points are there for you to think about, and we're not waffling, because we don't want to lose track of the problems we're trying to work through. And if you do like the show, if you do subscribe, if you do download it, it hopefully puts it in front of other men, and hopefully it will help them in the same way that I hope it's helping you. because certainly for me, talking about these things, it's helping me too. So that's it for this episode. Hopefully you'll join me on the next one. And until then, I wish you the best of luck.